Every single day I would pray about it and I'd be like, I don't know, God. And then I would reread the parable of the 3 talents. I wanted so much to be like the guy that tripled his money. I wanted to be like that CEO. It took a lot of talking, a lot of Bible verses. I did everything money research in the Bible, paid it off. And once I paid it off, it was like a limestone boulder was on my back. And after I paid it off, as scary as it was thinking I was releasing those assets, I didn't feel like that money was mine. But then I got to pay off the debt and it was just like, wow. And it was like walking on sunshine. It was just like I was walking on a cloud and rainbows and sunshine.
Hi, and welcome to the Christ-Driven Woman Podcast, the recommended podcast for Christian female entrepreneurs and really any woman who wants to grow closer to Christ. Whether you are just starting out in business, a seasoned entrepreneur, or a stay-at-home mom, you, sister, were created for far more than you could possibly ask or imagine. I'm Charisse Burton, Christian Certified Master Business and Life Coach, and from my experience growing from beyond the impossible as a teenage runaway to a successful CEO building multiple 6-figure businesses across multiple industries, I will teach you how to hit your first 10K month and then go far beyond that using my proven systems. These strategies will help you build a business that defies expectations and also will grow your faith beyond measure. I'm so glad you're here. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Christ-Driven Woman Podcast. I am Charisse Burton. I'm a Christian business and life coach, and I have a group program called the 6-Figure Revolution, the Christ-Driven 6-Figure Revolution, where I help women, Christian coaches, and online service providers step into their true identity, the person God created them to be before they were even born, go back all the way to that person, that identity, because it never changes, and work their business from that identity. So then they do hit their next 10-figure or 6 figures or 10 figures, whatever it is that you're shooting for. But it all starts with your identity. And today I have a really amazing guest with us, Lisa Drennon, and I can't wait for us. We've already had a conversation, already started. So we had to hit the record button so that we could get it all on camera because it's already been phenomenal. So let me tell you a little bit about Lisa. She is the founder of I Date Money. She is a wealth activator and independent insurance broker who has been in the finance industry since 1987. I'm tempted to tell you that I graduated from high school in 87, but I'm not gonna. So from self-sabotage to sovereignty, she rewrote her money story, paid off $100,000 of debt in 6 months, shut the front door, that's amazing, by implementing her unconventional money multiplier system. This is the very strategy that enabled her to retire 2.5 years early and move to her dream home at the beach as a millionaire. She is now on a mission to help 1 million women become millionaires without sacrificing their self-sovereignty by falling head over heels in love with money. So, and I know what y'all are thinking, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second, but welcome, Lisa. I am so happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to do this with you.
It's going to be awesome. So tell us first a little bit about your journey.
The short version.
Wherever the Holy Spirit leads you.
Yeah. There's so many different paths that I was on, but I started off in, I was born into a rich family. Both my parents were entrepreneurs. When I was 3 years old, they decided they didn't like each other anymore, and they got divorced. And my mom took us kids. I had 3 older brothers, but there's 4 of us. She took us kids and moved, and my dad went his way. So I don't know if there's East Side, West Side in the world, but in our community, the East Side was all the rich people. The West Side were all the poor people. So we moved to the West Side. My dad stayed at the East Side, and they were entrepreneurs together. My mom was a cosmetologist. My dad was a barber, and he also owned construction. So my mom had to build up her business from scratch. And there was this struggle. Like all of a sudden we had this big, huge 4-bedroom house with an in-ground swimming pool to a tiny 2-bedroom townhouse behind the railroad tracks. And she was gone working all the time. My older brothers, were taking care of me. And it just got to be like, this feast or famine. She'd come home with all this money, and then we would eat really good. And then she'd complain about money the rest of the week. And every single time there was like a birthday or something, to be like, well, I don't have that money. Or you're going to have to ask your father. And so as she worked her way back into building up her business, she got remarried, and we went through some, I call them hiccups, through some changes. And we ended up being what she calls lower middle class.
Okay.
And I would be like, why are we lower middle class? Why aren't we like upper middle class? And she's like, well, there's ranges of pay. And because your stepfather pays out child support to his kids and alimony, it puts us in a lower middle class bracket. And it really got me curious. And every Friday she would sit down with money, and she had a money envelope system that her mom taught her, and my grandma taught me that as well. And she'd be complaining, and she'd always borrow from these envelopes. And she'd say, man, I got to borrow from Peter to pay Paul. And I'd be like, I was like 5, 6 years old. I'd be like, well, who's Peter and who's Paul? And why are you borrowing from them?
I could so identify with that envelope system. I think our kids have heard back in the day, they heard us say so many times, there's nothing left in the envelope.
Yeah. Yep. And, and she would just tell me, she's like, well, there's not enough. And I'm like, well, why isn't there enough? It doesn't make any sense. She's, well, money goes where money is. And I was like, well, I want to be where money is. And so, being the only girl in my family, I had an imaginary friend because I wasn't athletic or anything. My brothers were always like scheming ways for us to make money. Back then, the Osmond family and the Jacksons were coming about. And they're like, Lisa, can you sing? And I would try to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and my voice would crack, and I would go into an asthma attack. And they're like, oh, man, you're so stupid. You're so stupid. And I'm like, we're not going to make millions of me singing. I'm sorry. I'm not that. That's not my God-given talent. And, so we went on, and my mom was very religious, very devout, grew up Catholic Italian, and being divorced was a shameful thing for her. And she got excommunicated from the church, and, she had to go find. So we visited other churches. I'm very welcome to different denominations. So I'm very familiar with all the different religions and stuff. But one thing, we ended up going to this Lutheran church, and they were very, they preached a lot about money. They preached about giving, and not just your money, but your time and your talents. And I was like, oh, okay, I get to give that way too, because I didn't really have any money to give. But I did when I got money, I used to find money all the time. So I had this imaginary friend who was money. We lived in the city. Down the street was like this little plaza, and there was a bar and a soda shop and a couple of little stores. On Saturday mornings, we would go down there and play, and people would be drinking, and money would fall out of their pocket, and I would find it. Be like, woohoo! So I mean, here I am, like 7, 8 years old. I'd find $20, and I'm like, $20. This is amazing. So I'd go home, and my mom and grandma would say, okay, you got 10% goes into savings, 10% goes to church. And then I'm like, well, what do I do with the 80%? They're like, well, you can save it for a new bike. You can, do whatever you want. I'm like, well, can I treat Wallace's was down the road, and they had the homemade root beer floats, like homemade root beer. Like, can I go down there with my friends and treat them? They're like, yeah, if you want to. So I would treat all my friends. And so every time I found $20, this is what I would do. And I remember just sitting on the stool, like kicking my feet, and I can still smell the root beer and the bubbles hitting my nose and the delicious.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And so I got acquainted with money. It's just like, well, I'm going to be rich when I grow up. And then I'd go to my dad's house, and I'd see the contrast. And he was, in this town called Penfield, with this big, beautiful home with in-ground swimming pool. He had a new family, and the rooms were humongous, and there's like yard, like fields, like farms, and there's this cute little shop, like this little not like a market, like no, not a market. What are those little stores called in the country? Like a little country store.
Okay.
And we would like run and play to it, and the owner was really sweet. He would give us little candy sticks, and I mean, like, wow, this is such a beautiful place to live. Like, I go to my mom's, like I lived with my mom, and it would be the city, and we'd have traffic, and noise, and and nighttime we'd have to worry about drunk people walking by from the bar, because, and they would hide me in the house so no one would harm me, and it'd be like, okay, contrast of the worlds. So, growing up that way, I was just like determined, like, how can I be the best steward of my, gifts and talents, and what can I do? And explored and just kept tapping into it, and got into my career and started working in insurance, and almost became an insurance agent, but I liked the law better, so I went into being a paralegal. bankruptcy paralegal, and my job was to create budgets for people who had just filed bankruptcy, which is the most embarrassing thing that people could do for. And they would look at me like, "You're so young." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I do budgets all the time. So here you go. Did you hear about the money envelope system?" And that's what I would create for them. And they successfully built riches and got out of that. And of course, it's boring as can be to do that continuously for 8 hours a day in that environment. So I hopped over to real estate, and that was a lot of fun, and that got boring too. So I was just like, what am I going to do? I don't want to be a real estate paralegal, bankruptcy paralegal. So I went into estate and trust planning. And I thought, okay, well, this is a great stepping stone. And as I look back and reflect, I'm like, God had a plan.
Oh, yeah,
all the things I use as a wealth activator. So then I got hired at the Social Security Administration, and financial planning, retirement, disability claims, loved it. I became a treasurer for 3 not-for-profits. I volunteered with the Boy Scouts, teaching them personal management, finance, fitness, things of that nature. And just really just dove into it and absolutely loved it. And when I decided to retire, my husband was like, well, I was doing financial coaching all along, because people kept saying, well, how do you keep all your money? Like, how do you do all these things? Like you're married, you got kids. And I'm like, the money envelope system. And so I would teach people that. And then when I was thinking about retiring, I'm like, oh, I could just be a financial coach. And my husband came home one day from golf, and he's like, why don't you become a Medicare insurance broker? I met a guy, and he makes like $50,000 a year doing it part-time. And Medicare is dear to my heart, because working at Social Security, I was helping people get back to work after being disabled, and they were getting taken advantage of. My mom, I mean, she's passed away now, but she had diabetes and heart disease. She had over 23 medications. She was a widow, and all of her money was going towards prescription. She was paying so much money in healthcare. And so I'm like, okay, I'll look into it. 2 of my coworkers had resigned to do this. So I looked into it, and I was like, oh, okay, I can do both. So that's how I became a wealth activator.
That is amazing, that story. And like you said, how God had a plan, because it almost, the way I feel sometimes whenever you are really chasing your identity in Christ, and it's almost like you don't know that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to find the thing that you're interested in, or that you're good at, or that you even just want to do, but it never fully, I mean, even if you love it, at some point, like you said, you might get bored with it, or you move to the next thing, but you still take a piece of all of what you're learning, because God's preparing you to get closer and closer to step into that person that He created you to be way back before you were even born. And He's got that identity ready, but then we're growing as we go so that we can get there. But we also, run into all those lies of, they're endless lies about our identity that we just accept and start walking in that. So tell me a little bit about that $100,000 debt. How did that affect, because I look at money like, are people having money identities? Mm-hmm. I really see that. I saw that in myself. I see that in my kids and how we approach money. Mm-hmm. So I find that really interesting. So tell me a little bit about how that worked in your life and really either molded or caused you to dig deeper about your identity in Christ and who He created you to be as a wealth activator.
Yeah. Well, it's really embarrassing, because when I was 22, so I was a single mom at 18. Prior to age 17, I was faced with 3 unplanned pregnancies. And unfortunately, 2 of them ended in abortion. And the 3rd time I got pregnant, I was just like getting rid of the narcissist gaslighter guy. And I'm like, I have to turn my life around. This is ridiculous. So I became a single mom at 18, and it was hard. I was working 2 jobs, working full time. I was, working part time, trying to make ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck as a bankruptcy paralegal. And then I was working, my brother owned a business, and I was his receptionist for his business on the weekends. And so I had all this extra money, but it was all going for my growing child. And my friend told me, hey, you can get a JCPenney credit card and buy your kid clothes and just pay it off when it comes. Well, of course, it's tempting. So I did that. I got the card, $500 limit back in 1990, something or other. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I could buy myself a couple of things. And then the bill would come and I'd be like, oh, I don't have this to pay off.
Right.
So fast forward 3 years later, someone had I'd loaned somebody money by co-signing a loan. They turned around and forged my name and took another loan out and defaulted on it. They used my car as collateral. And I had over $32,000 worth of debt. And I was just like, oh no, I couldn't pay it. So knowing bankruptcy rules and all of that, I decided to go pro bono and filed for bankruptcy. Stood in front of the judge, and the judge is like, oh my God, you are so young. He goes, what are you doing here? And so I told him, he goes, will you promise me you can learn everything you can about finances and never be in this position again? And I said, absolutely. So I went on this quest to learn everything I could about finances. And one of the, when I first started working at Social Security, one of my clients had told me, he goes, can I give you, I'd taken his retirement application, went through all the things, like, can I give you some advice now? And I'm like, absolutely. He goes, do you like to read? I'm like, yeah, I'd love to read. He goes, I have a book, Richest Man in Babylon. He goes, read this book. If I would have read it when I was your age, I would have been a millionaire. I'm like, I want to be a millionaire. So I read the book several times, have my clients read the book. But it really put that principle in there about the importance of saving and, you know, paying yourself first before anything else. And it's Parkinson's law. Whatever you decide to do, it's going to get done in the time frame that you want. And whatever you decide to, you know, when you decide to put 10% away, you're going to put 10% away. And like, I already had that principle instilled in me from when I was a kid from my mom and my grandma. But as a single mom, it was just like, had to keep borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, because I would have this money saved, but then I wouldn't, my child would need things. I would need things. My car would break down. And I'd be like, why am I always like tapping into my money? It doesn't make sense. Right. Well, the subconscious pattern was you borrow from Peter to pay Paul. And it was stuck with me.
Yep.
So after I filed bankruptcy, I ended up getting married, and my husband and I had gotten a house together, and all of a sudden I was getting all of these credit card offers. I was like, no, I'm not touching credit cards. Well, I hit 40 and something snapped in me. My husband says I went through the midlife crisis, but I got really rebellious, because what I had done every single day, my husband sits down and he dates money. He writes down he tracks his assets. And he'd be like, Lisa, sit down, track your assets. I'm like, what for? I'm like in my 30s now, right? I can't get that money till I'm at least 62. Who cares what it's doing? He's like, you want to pay attention to it because you want to make sure it's working for you. And what I had done after bankruptcy is I took all of my money envelopes and opened up a bank account for each envelope and deposited, had my paycheck automatically go. And then my money from my part-time job and any extra money I would get, I would use that to buy clothes for the kids or whatever. Like, you know, if I didn't have enough, I would spoil them. So I had all my money working for me. And then I would get my paycheck, and my paycheck would say I had like $200 cash. And I would be so upset because I wasn't paying attention, because everything was out of my visual and accounted for. And I'd be like, I only have $200 in cash. Like, this is so ridiculous. So when my husband told me to track my assets, I'd be like, no, I don't want to. This is ridiculous. So not paying attention to anything, not, you know, tracking any of my income or expenses or whatever. 40 years old, I get this offer for a 0% credit card with a $10,000 limit. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. I wanted to remodel my bathroom. So I got creative with finances, and I'm like, I got 12 months to pay it off. Well, 12 months came, went, and I kept I was addicted to 0% credit cards. So I kept transferring this money, thinking I'll pay it off. I'll give myself another 12 months. And I remodeled like 3 bathrooms, a kitchen. I went on a couple of vacations, bought my kids a couple of cars, bought myself a car. And before you know it, I had all this debt, had no idea. And I thought, what is wrong with me? All these bills are coming in. At that time, I had 12 different credit cards. I did a consolidation loan to relieve some of it because I ran out of 0%. Moved some money around, all of a sudden another 0%. I'm like, what is going on here? So I kept playing this game. At about 44 years old, I was like, this has to stop. What is wrong with me? You know, I'm working now. At that point, I was working 3 jobs, and the intent was to take all of my money from the 2 extra jobs and put it towards the debt, and I wasn't doing it. Right. So then online coaching came a thing, and I'm like, I know, I'll become an online coach, and then I'll use all that money and pay off the debt. I wasn't doing it. So I was working with this one marketing coach, and she's like, you know, I want you to go into the money mindset modules. Met this woman who used like hypnosis and things like that about your money story. And I'm like, I need to talk to her. So through her program, using art, we mapped out my debt. And it was the scariest thing. I mean, I was in tears. I was crying. I was so angry. I remember punching pillows and just like being so frustrated and angry and just livid. And my husband and I got into World War III because I had to tell him about my debt at this point. That was part of the coaching program. And when I told him, when I added it up, I was like, I choked. I went into an asthma attack. I was like,
oh my goodness,
$1,000 of debt. Like, how? And like, and I ended up crying. Like, this coach was so sweet. I like ended up crying my eyes out with her. And she's like, okay, let's grab your paintbrush. Let's paint it out. What does your debt look like? So we painted it out. I painted it out. And then I took a different color brush and started drawing out, pulling out all the things I used with my debt, and realized, wow, I didn't just blow money. I wasn't irresponsible. I didn't go out to fancy dinners or anything. I bought an education. I went on travels. I bought vehicles. I remodeled my home. And I said, okay, well, that makes a lot doable. So when I told my husband, he was like, you committed financial infidelity. I'm like, what?
Whoa.
That's heavy. Yeah, it is very heavy. It still makes me, I still get like rage inside of me. And, so I had gone through some, a counseling program called The Healing Journey. And I ended up facilitating that. And it was based on the book it was based on the story of Joseph in the Bible, in the Genesis. And I realized, wow, people have been screwing up their finances since day one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, there's so much dysfunction in the Bible. Like, who knew? And so when I started looking at the debt, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a plan to pay it off. Well, at the same time, I created a wealth activation roadmap, and I started tracking my assets. And my husband and I made an agreement that I would be accountable for myself with my money by tracking it. So every week I would date money, and I would say, okay, money, let's sit down and have coffee. I know I can't touch your assets, but you know what? And I didn't even think they were mine. My name was on them, but I can't touch those because those are for retirement and investment. But when I added up my assets, I had over $2 million. I was like, what? Wow. I saved all this money, me? And I would double check and triple check, and I would like do the calculations again. And I'd get on the call with my coach and be like, are these numbers right? Like, I couldn't believe it. And like all these years I had saved all the money, and my husband had set it up so that it would maximize for me. There's a formula that we use to get the optimization in the investments. And it was like, wow. And she's like, okay, so now at this time I'm getting ready to retire. And it's like, no, you do have to wait until you're ready to retirement age. And so Heidi was my coach's name. She's like, well, look at it both ways. She's do your own coaching program with your finances and see what works out. So even by withdrawing some of my assets to pay off that debt, I still had over $1 million. And so I did. So I took it out. It was the scariest thing. It took me 4 months to do it. And every single day I would pray about it, and I'd be like, I don't know, God. And then I would reread the parable of the 3 talents over and over and over again. And I'm like, I wanted so much to be like the guy that tripled his money. I wanted to be like that CEO. And it took a lot of talking, a lot of Bible verses. I did everything money research in the Bible, and paid it off. And once I paid it off, it was just like it was like a limestone boulder was on my back. And after I paid it off, as scary as it was thinking I was releasing those assets, I didn't feel like that money was mine, but that I got to pay off the debt. And it was just like, wow. And it was like walking on sunshine. It was just like I was walking on a cloud, and rainbows and sunshines and butterflies and unicorns were just all around me. Like, okay. And I'm like, I'm going to be responsible with debt. I'm going to leverage debt to my advantage. But breaking that chain, mindset is the crux of all that we do, and our thoughts are the most powerful tool that we have. And I think that's why, God says in Scripture to captivate your thoughts, make them obedient to Christ. And I always said that, and people were like, I don't know what you mean by captivate your thoughts. And I'm like, to think about what you're thinking, write them down and look at them. Like, do you really believe this? Just like when Satan questioned Eve, like, did God really say? Like, who really said this to you, and why do you believe it? And when I started doing that, I need to pay attention. I need to track it. I need to look at these numbers, and then I need to make better decisions with my investments. Like, do I really need, some of these coaching programs, they're a big investment. And it's like, how many coaches do you need? Like, at one time I had 4 coaches.
Right. Yes. I mean, it's true. Well, it's so interesting that you said that too, because I talk about that a lot. It is so easy to have these thoughts come in without even thinking about what you're thinking, and you just assume it's true. And you then take action according to that thought that you thought was true, which is really not true, but you didn't take the time to take your thoughts captive and really process, is this true according to what God's telling me? Or is this just something that I'm thinking because I'm afraid or because I'm believing a lie or whatever? And I mean, it would change the world if more people, not even all, but if more people would take the time to think about what they're thinking about. So I love that you said that. Now, I definitely want us to talk about that scripture, because your mission is to help 1 million women become millionaires. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this that are going to be raising their hand. And it's to help women, or by helping women fall head over heels in love with money. I would love for you to speak to that, because, that's one of the first things that people talk about is, well, it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. And I think there is more behind that than what we actually are standing on. So I would love for you to speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the misconception is, the Bible verse is from 1 Timothy 6, and it does say the love of money is the root of all evil, and anything that we put in front of Christ is evil. I mean, and when we think about money is talked about so many times in the Bible. I mean, there's thousands of scriptures about money, and we need money to survive. And I believe that money in the hands of good people does amazing things. And when you look throughout scripture of all the people that were wealthy, I mean, David, Solomon didn't ask for wealth. He asked for wisdom. And because he didn't ask for wealth, God gave him money and, on top of his wisdom, and he was the richest man. And you think about the blessings that people have that are wealthy, that help others, that can create movement, that can help and support others in a way that you can't do if you're in this scarcity mindset. So when we think about the love of money, it's actually loving the fact that I want money to, like, all I consume is money. Like, everything I do, it's all about the money. I'm selfish, I'm self-centered, and that's the love of the money. That's the root of the evil. Because if you think about, Lucifer was a beautiful angel in heaven, and he rebelled against God. His pride actually got him in trouble because he wanted to be better than God, and he coerced 1/3 of the angels to go with him, and they were cast out of heaven. And his whole mission on earth is to deter us, is to get us to go with him and stay away from God. And when you think about it, he uses money because it's like crypto for us, right? Whatever, we have so many needs. And to me, it's all about trust. Like, so I didn't trust God. I mean, I was in such a dark place after I had my abortions. I got into drugs and everything. And I had this dark walk, and I've known the Lord my whole entire life. I come from a very religious background. I was saved at 12 years old in July of 1979. And I couldn't believe that I had did all these things after I had accepted Christ. And in 2014, I rededicated my life to him. And I was just like, okay. And I went on this quest to learn about scripture, because I had so much stuff in my head that I didn't know if it was right or wrong. And man takes one concept and they blow it out of proportion. And they make so much, there's so many legalities involved. And one of my favorite studies in my, I've earned my graduate theology degree. And one of my studies was systematic theology by John Grudem. And it's a huge, thick book, and it pulls apart verse by verse scripture. And you really look at it in the historical and the doctrine and the life application and the context, like what were they saying in the original language? And when they're talking about money, like, Matthew was a tax collector. He loved money so much, and he loved having the luxury, but he was selfish and self-centered. He wasn't sharing it with anybody. His parents were living in a place that was small and secluded, he didn't do anything to help them. So his love for money separated him from the Lord. And, as a result, he wasn't happy. So when you're chasing after things that aren't good for you, you end up becoming this disparate person who's sad and full of anxiety and not trusting, selfish, self-centered. And one of the things that we do, so I didn't trust God because I didn't think God could ever forgive me, because how could he? I had to forgive myself. How would you forgive yourself for something that you did? It didn't make sense to me.
Right.
And so God really had to open up my eyes and show me that, yes, I am forgiven. And I am, because I'm a child. So these lies that we believe. So when I got into the concept of I date money and falling head over heels in love with money, it's about love is a peaceful thing. It's a security. It's safety.
It's joyful.
Right, exactly. When you look at the definition of love, it's not this sexual intimacy type of thing. You love your child. You love books. You love chocolate. You love, your spouse. You love your friends.
Yes.
It's this heartfelt feeling. It's a heartfelt warmth in your heart that is joy. And joy only comes from, people talk about happy and joy. Joy comes from within. It's internal.
Right.
And it's just serenity. It's just peacefulness and calmness. To me, it reminds me of a waterfall. And it's just that gentle lapping of that calmness and that sweet serenity of that music that the water plays as it's falling down. And when you think about it, when you have money, you can help so many people.
Oh, absolutely.
So be a good steward.
I love that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I love that, because that thought, that image, because, like I said several times, my thing is, your identity in Christ. And when we have a money identity that is of scarce and, scarcity and lack and fear, or even, we have a debt story as well. And I thought paying off $41,000 in a year was good, but I love yours, but
it's very good.
but paying that off, I still came out of that not healed. I still came out of that thinking, and with the identity that I didn't know how to handle money well, that I didn't have money that wanted to come to me, or that I was drawing money in, or that money was fun. Money was scary to me, because if we ever got any, it was going to disappear. And that was my identity. So guess what happened? Anytime money would come in, it disappeared real fast. So if we can just revamp, renew our mind like God tells us to do, renew our mind about money, and that it is loving the evil, or putting anything. I don't put chocolate above God, but I certainly love chocolate. So loving money in a way that is freeing and joyful and giving, and understanding that it is a tool that we can use, that God has given us, or else he wouldn't say in Deuteronomy 8:18 that he gives us the ability to create wealth. He would never say that if he didn't want us to do that and then use it to bless others and glorify him. So I really love that you have that piece, because I think that statement that you want women to fall head over heels in love with money, because so many women are afraid of money. We want it and we want to use it, but there's a fear of some kind attached to it that is wreaking havoc on their identity and blocking them from getting to that next place. So it's brilliant. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot, it's not like a one and done. There's so many layers to peel back, because one of the scriptures in the Old Testament is about, generations will be cursed to the seventh generation. And I never really understood that until I started learning about all the things we pass on from generation to generation, all the things that we know no one ever taught us about finances, but we did catch a lot of things. Just the money idioms that we grew up with, watching our families deal with money. And, then when you get married, you bring in two different sets of family values, and realizing that all these things have to be unlearned. And we need to really look at it and say, okay, how do I want my relationship with money to look like? And do I want to be responsible? And even so, there's multimillionaires who are afraid to spend their assets. And, they look at, like, I live in a community where people are retired, they own 2 or 3 houses. And we had a conversation and they're like, oh, no, I'm going to wait till I'm 67 to draw my Social Security, which hurts my ears when I say that. I'm like, you should get it at 62. I don't want to have to pay more taxes. Okay, have you crunched the numbers? Because really, but they're like, well, no, because I've been tapping into my assets and that was really hard because I don't want to touch that money. I mean, I'm only 62. It's got to last till I die. Well, 1, tomorrow's not promised. And 2, you saved all of this money to tap into at retirement. Right. So like understanding like that feeling that we get, it was the same thing with the 30 years I worked at Social Security, regardless of people's income, they would all say the same thing. Will there be enough? Will there be enough to get me through to the day I die? And like, do I need to leave an inheritance? And all of these different questions that it actually paralyzes us from tapping into our money. And I mean, I still have that same guilt. Like when I go to tap into my assets, I have permission, I'm retired. And I'm like, this is money I saved for retirement. This is money I wanted to enjoy after I wasn't working 40, 60 hours a week.
Right.
But every time I tap into it, it's just like guilt. Like, oh, you're using that money and that's your rainy day fund. I'm like, okay, what's a rainy day fund?
Exactly.
When is it going to rain? So
you get to decide when it rains.
Exactly. But just like peeling that back. And I think it's the same thing because, my few years back, one of my niches was being a client attraction coach. And I would work with women who couldn't even figure out what niche they wanted to be in because they're doubting themselves. And like literally, I mean, we literally look in the mirror and beat ourselves up. Like, you never talk to anybody the way you talk to yourself.
Oh, 100%. And we look at women we look at them and think, oh my goodness, they're so put together. They're hitting 7, 8 figures. They know exactly what they're doing. And those women are still battling at a different level maybe, but they're still battling similar things that are keeping them from getting to their next place because they haven't removed the lies or taken time to identify the thought that they're believing that isn't true.
Yeah.
So tell everyone listening a little bit more about your program and how they can get in touch with you.
Okay. Yeah. So idatemoney.com is best way to get in touch. There's this fun money dating game where you meet 7 money archetypes. We all have all 7 of them in us, but there's 3 dominating. There's 1 that's the driver. But it kind of like gives you a clearer picture of like, okay, why do I have these habits with money? So my program is called the Wealth Accelerator. I have Wealth Accelerator, I have Crush on Debt, and I have Profit Gold Mine. So my Profit Gold Mine is my money mindset. It's rewriting your money story. I'm a certified aromatherapy practitioner, so I use essential oils to help accelerate the thought process. So when we think of something, smell will accelerate our thoughts. Why are we feeling this way towards something, these overwhelming thoughts that we have? So it's a really fun practice that just really helps. It's kind of related to, I studied under Dr. Benjamin Perkis, who's a clinical psychologist. So he mapped it all out and it's really powerful. So using that, we rewrite your money story. And then for people who have debt and want to pay it off, it's Crush on Debt. There's, it's 7 simple steps that we go through. We meet weekly for calls. We go through, we create our plan. We make sure we stay on track, different ways to raise your credit score, to pay down debt faster. And then my big program is my Wealth Accelerator. It's for 6-figure coaches who want to align their signature offer and optimize their back-end financials. I have found that most 6-figure coaches do not have a business financial plan in place. So they open up their doors and have no plan in place. And I'm like, okay, how are you running your business? So they get stuck, right? So I do have some multi-5-figure coaches in there as well. And basically they plateau and they can't figure it out. And what happens is we go into these valleys, I call them, with our signature offer where we'll be gung-ho, we'll do our beta, we'll get all of our clients, and then all of a sudden we don't have a client for like 3-4 months. And it's like, what happened? And it's just us self-sabotaging, getting in our own way. So I give a bird's eye view. And so like I actually do profit gold audits, which are separate. If somebody gets one of those, then they can go into the Wealth Acceleration. But the Wealth Accelerator does both business and personal finances. And if a person's married or they have a business bestie, they both can come into the program. And we just go over everything. We make sure that the business is separate from the personal, that we're implementing what I call my money multiplier system, where we basically take 10%, save it, 10% we give it away, and 10% we have fun with. And then the other 70% is strategically placed to cover your needs and your wants. And then for your business part of it, we implement a system so that you're, depending on how much you're making, you either cut yourself a salary of 50% compensation, or you draw a salary of a dollar amount based on what your needs are in your personal life. So it's customized for each person. But the key is, like, if you're doing, so a lot of entrepreneurs are self-employed, and they'll file a self-employed tax return, or they'll LLC as a self-employed. If the rule of thumb is if they're making less than $250, they're going to draw comp, and they're going to set aside money. We have money buckets for profit, taxes, and all of that. And we work on the mindset. The Crush on Debt membership is included in the Wealth Acceleration, and it's a 12-month program. So it's really, the first 3 months are very intense because we pull apart what your beliefs are, where you are, and we get your money in order. And depending on how diligent someone is about wanting to track their money and like what makes sense for them. Like, I have a client, Marianne, who's 62 years old, and she's been commingling her business and personal finances for years. It took us 3 months to untangle them, but it took her 3 months to understand what we are doing. And sometimes she's like, why do we need to do it this way? Because why can't I just put this money here? And I'm like, because that's not your business money comes over here. Personal money comes over here. But
right. It's not the right bucket.
Right. But we get into these habits where we don't do that. We commingle funds, and everybody across the board. When I worked at Social Security, I would review people's tax returns and their business portfolios, self-employed and corporate. And I cannot tell you how many people deposited business income into a personal checking account and be like, stop it, please. Go open up a business checking account. Right. This is how you're going to do it. And the resistance to wanting to, I just started working with a new client in my Crush on Debt. And I said, okay, you need a business checking. And she's like, well, how am I going to deposit my cash if I work with people in person? I go, well, you can either do a money order or you can deposit into your checking account and then immediately transfer it. No, I don't want to do that. I go, well, you have to do that. I said so. No. I said, well, let's talk about why you don't want to do that. Like, I mean, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But this is the thought process. This is why you are here. Do you want to be a business owner, or do you want to commingle your funds and have all this problem with the IRS?
Right.
So, but that's the identity piece, right? Because it's like, oh, I mean, I've always done it this way, and now you're going to make me change my habit. And like we were talking, one of my clients was talking about, she's like, it's almost, she couldn't break the cycle of debt. And she's like, it's almost like a narcissist relationship where it's not good for you, but you keep going back to it because it's familiar.
Oh, that's
and I'm
good.
like, yeah, I'm like, that's really good. That's a podcast episode on identity.
That is, wow. That's an eye opener right there.
Mm-hmm.
I love that analogy because it's true. It's absolutely true. Wow.
Yeah.
Lisa, this has been amazing. The time has flown by. I've loved having you here. I've loved the whole conversation. I hope so many people out there hear this conversation, because I think debt and being stuck in that cycle is a pandemic in its own. I mean, all on its own. So thank you so much for being here. We will have the ways for people to get in touch with you in the show notes. Is there anything that you would like to end with or leave with the audience?
Oh, yeah, my tagline. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It's what you do with it.
100%. I love that. Thank you so much, Lisa. Hey, thank you so much for being here today and listening. Please leave a review and tell me what hit your heart the most. I would love to hear from you. And if you want to partner with me and the production of this podcast, just head over to this Patreon link. Thanks so much.